Did you know in Japan, there's a ghost called the Ash Cart Woman? Locals say if you ever see her pushing a wooden cart uphill, never offer to help. They call her Hyana, which simply means Ash Woman. An old mountain trail has carried that warning for generations. One rainy evening, a college student hiking alone found an elderly woman struggling with a cart full of gray ashes. She smiled without looking up and whispered, "Just one push." Feeling guilty, he grabbed the handle. The cart felt strangely light at first. Then, with every step, it became heavier. The ashes started sliding apart on their own. Beneath them were pale human hands, all reaching upward. The woman finally looked at him. Her cheeks were split from ear to ear, packed with black ash instead of teeth, and tiny burning embers glowed deep inside her mouth. She let go of the cart, but it kept moving on its own. The student was found the next morning, standing perfectly still beside the trail, his clothes covered in cold gray ash. They say he still won't speak, except to whisper, "Just one push." Every night, Elias walked through this cemetery alone, never knowing what waited in the fog. He knew every grave, every path, and every broken stone until one night, he discovered a grave he had never seen before. It belonged to Margaret Vale, who had died in 1947. The next morning, Elias returned to check on the mysterious grave, but when he reached row 7, the grave was gone. Then he found it several rows away from where he left it. There were no footprints around it, and no signs that anyone had moved it. Even the grass beneath the stone was completely undisturbed. That night, Elias decided to document exactly where the grave stood. He measured the distance between the grave and the cemetery gate. Then he marked its exact position carefully on his map. But the following morning, the grave had moved again. This time, it was much closer to the cemetery entrance. That was when Elias stopped believing this was just a prank. He searched through the cemetery's oldest burial records, and beside Margaret's name, he discovered a terrifying note. Decades earlier, someone had reported the exact same thing. An old photograph showed Margaret's grave near the cemetery gate. It was following the same path, always moving toward the exit. That night, Elias watched the grave from a safe distance. Then he noticed strange markings carved beside the cemetery gate. The symbols seemed to form a trail leading beyond the cemetery walls. Following them, Elias discovered a rusted metal box buried underground.
There you
Inside
are.
were old photographs,
Now let's see what is
cemetery
inside.
keys, and forgotten records. One photograph showed Margaret's grave, decades before Elias arrived. Another document explained why the grave kept moving. But its final sentence contained a warning
recorded by the
meant
parish
for
sexton
whoever found
that
it.
Mrs.
The grave wasn't trying to leave the cemetery. That night, Margaret's grave finally reached the entrance. Then, without warning, the cemetery gate opened by itself. Beyond it, a dark figure stood silently in the fog. It looked like the figure was waiting for the grave to arrive. Then Elias noticed something freshly carved into the stone. The message was simple: "I'm not trying to leave." Elias finally understood what the grave had been doing. He stepped beyond the gate and found something buried beneath the road. It was another grave marker with another name. Elias looked back at Margaret's grave. It had moved again. Slowly, impossibly, it crossed beyond the cemetery gate. Then it stopped in the middle of the fog-covered road. And far in the distance, a single light appeared. By morning, Elias was gone. Only his flashlight remained, and Margaret's grave stood far down the road. Long pause, with someone waiting beside it. There was one rule every night shift nurse at St. Mary's Hospital knew: never go into the old East Wing after midnight. Nobody ever explained why. Norah had worked there for almost 3 years. She had heard the rumors, but she'd never believed them until one night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., she heard a sound coming from the abandoned wing. At first, she thought it was a machine. Then she realized it sounded like a door opening. Norah followed the noise down an old corridor. At the end was an elevator she'd never seen before. Inside, there were buttons for 3 basement levels. But beneath them was another button. There was no number on it. Norah didn't touch it. But somehow, the elevator started moving. When the doors
we should
opened,
check the rooms
Norah
carefully.
found herself in a part of the hospital that looked decades old. The walls were yellow with age. The lights were dim, and every room was covered in dust. Then she saw it. Room 414. The room wasn't on any hospital map, but someone was inside. An elderly man was lying in the bed. He looked directly at Norah and asked one question. "Has Dr. Elias arrived yet?" Norah checked the patient's chart. There was no name, no admission date, no medical history, nothing. She told him there was no doctor named Elias working that night. The patient smiled. Then he said, "There will be." A few seconds later, the door behind Norah slowly opened. At the end of the hallway stood a doctor. White coat, gray hair, glasses. He was staring directly at her. Norah stepped into the corridor, but when she looked again, the doctor was gone. She rushed back into room 414. The patient was now sitting upright. He looked at her calmly and said, "He's finally here." Norah turned toward the doorway. The doctor was standing there again. This time, he was much closer. Norah recognized his face, not from the hospital, from an old photograph hanging on the wall. She grabbed it. The photograph showed Dr. Elias standing with a hospital staff. The date was 1989, 37 years earlier. Norah looked from the photograph to the doctor standing in front of her. It was the exact same man. He hadn't aged. Norah ran. She sprinted through the corridor and reached the elevator. The doors closed behind her. She never looked back. When Norah returned to the nurse's station, everything seemed normal. The old wing was gone. The elevator was gone. And there was no record of room 414. Not on the computer. Not on the blueprints. Nowhere. But the next morning, Norah found an old photograph sitting on her desk. It showed room 414. On the back was a handwritten warning, "Do not enter." And beneath it was another sentence, "The patient is still waiting." Norah quit that morning. But according to hospital staff, the old elevator still appears sometimes, usually around 2:14 a.m. And whenever its doors open, there is only one button waiting to be pressed. 414 if you like the story.